And imagine your parents standing in front of you, mom and dad, mother and father, mommy and daddy. They're standing in front of you. Look at them. So how do you feel looking at them as your parents? Feel that life energy coming from your ancestors, through your parents, through you. What's the quality of that flow?
My parents' trauma is like a perpetual motion machine.
God, trauma generator. How does intergenerational transmission fit into this? And it does. It does extraordinarily well. First of all, it does genetically. I mean, there's evidence now that trauma can be passed down in terms of people's sensitivity and people's trauma response, at least 3 generations. Rachel Suda has done this work with 9/11 survivors and Holocaust survivors and stuff. And there was a lot of work done with in Scandinavia because they keep good records and they had to go through the famines of the Nazi era.
I just saw a headline. I didn't read the article, unfortunately, so I can't say I've vetted it or anything, but I just saw the headline this morning that apparently there's new evidence that trauma actually does physically change the genetic structure.
Yeah, and this is exactly that's probably quoting Rachel's research, the Scandinavian research, and so now this is just on a genetic level. I mean, an epigenetic. I don't want to go into too much in the weeds here, but we got 22,000 genes, right? But we got 1 million epigenetic markers that turn genes on and off depending upon life's experience, largely through methylization, but in other ways also. And apparently, if trauma has caused certain genes to be activated in response, in defensive response, that's passed on to at least 3 generations in some cases. But also, now we're getting into the esoteric. I believe that there's morphic transmissions too. I haven't seen much data on this, but I've seen some. And a lot of the phenomenological data on this comes from the Hellinger work, the constellation work. So Marcel presented on this, right? And one of the things that he said that about Hellinger, and Hellinger said there's 3 forms of love that can be more open or less open. One is the love of belonging. Another is the love of honoring who's come before. And the third one is the love involves the balance of giving and receiving. That the love can be blocked, those channels. And Hellinger said that we need to open the channels to our parents. Somehow we need to be reconciled, no matter how fucked up they were or are. We need to be able to feel some of their life energy, at least, coming from the ancestors through them to us. I did this with one of my clients, and it changed his life. It was an amazing thing. I did the exercise that Marcelo did. And just for a moment, everybody, just so that we can kind of get more experiential here, everybody is watching this just for a moment. Just relax. And imagine your parents standing in front of you, mom and dad, mother and father, mommy and daddy. They're standing in front of you. Look at them. So how do you feel looking at them as your parents? How do you feel towards mom? What's her expression looking at you? How do you feel towards dad? What's his expression looking at you? Now, there's life energy coming from their ancestors through them to you, and through you to your children. On a scale of 1% to 100%, how much life energy is coming from them to you? 5%? 10%? 80%? From mom? And how does it feel coming from her? 5%? 10%, 80% from dad. How does it feel coming from him? Feel that life energy coming into you. If you have children, feel it coming through you to your children. Feel that life energy coming from your ancestors, through your parents, through you. What's the quality of that flow? Okay, now we'll stop here. There's a lot more we could do with this. But what was your experience with that, Corey?
Funny
And
you should
I know
ask.
your parents are having difficulties, so I know it's a hard one.
I'm going through. Yeah, I'm. My parents' trauma is like a perpetual motion machine.
God, trauma generator.
So yeah, so we're dealing with some flare ups these days. But what I do notice, Keith, is, especially as you reached beyond just my parents and into previous generations, into ancestry, what I felt was this surge of energy, and how, in a lot of ways, in most ways, in almost every way, I am not very much like my family of origin. I'm just not. I'm a very different person than they were, and a lot of that was sort of just through the accident of birth, the accident of being born into a particular family with particular challenges. And a part of that was a conscious sort of effort to carve a new path, right? Like, I'm seeing patterns repeating themselves through generations. I don't want to repeat that pattern, especially when I have kids. So I'm gonna kind of fork and go in this direction. But what I appreciate is when you just simply describe it as energy, right?
Yes.
It's not content, it's not details, it's simply energy. And whether you're repeating a pattern, positive or negative, or you are deviating from a pattern for positive or negative reasons, right? Like, there's plenty of good families where there's black sheep. In my case, I'm a white sheep in a family of black sheep, right? In a certain way. Whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, there's energy there, and that energy keeps on moving forward, like water finding the lowest point and naturally carving through the territory to get where it needs to go. And that was sort of my experience, and obviously, just because I'm in sort of the midst of a particular kind of flare up with my parents doesn't mean I can't also expand beyond that, and I can notice, there's a lot of patterns that I try not to repeat, but you know what? There's a lot of patterns that were instilled in me that make me who I am, and I'm grateful for that. And there's just sort of a release, and there's a grace that comes with that, and there's even sort of in a way a kind of forgiveness, right? There, by the grace of God, go I. I very well could have been any of these people if things were just a little bit different. So that brings a sort of an empathy and a willingness to retain that sense of connection, even in times of extreme disruption of the heart, I would say. So that was kind of my blast from that.
Well, maybe there was an ancestor that you don't even know about that was a lot like you. I mean, I believe in morphic fields. One way that's the reason why I'm mentioning this is I'm a very individualistic American type person. Okay, doing my thing here, and the idea of opening myself up to the energetic transfer of multiple generations, all the way back to Genghis Khan, who's probably an ancestor, because he's an ancestor to about 15 or 20% of the world. But feeling that expanded my understanding of influence. Now, whether it's metaphor or not, consciousness has its own rhythms.
Yeah.
And so for me, my consciousness has shifted, feeling those energies coming from them, from me, through my children, and to other people too. But there's something about family of origin, the blood kinship line, the tribal line. And that's not its construct. A kin selection is one of the main drivers of evolution. Okay, so kin selection goes back 2.5 billion years. I don't think that it ended with humans. Okay, right. I don't think so. But the current form of it, with humans, like everything else, has just gotten more complex.
Yeah.
Now, I'm using that as an example because my ideas and the constructs around personality disorders, for instance, and not to mention just temperamental traits, which are highly heritable, as it turns out, didn't get altered as much as expanded. By Marcella invited me to read that book and then participate in that conversation. And I had done constellations before, but when Marcella was talking about Hellinger, I finally captured some of Hellinger's spirit. Every once in a while, I've got that with a lot of the teachers. You study them enough, and all of a sudden they're there inside you. Jung is inside me, Freud is inside me, Adler's inside me, Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls. I feel like I have a personal relationship with them, like Christians believe they have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I got a little bit of that with Hellinger, studying him a little bit, and then Marcello's thing. And I was expanded by that. In the dialectic, I want to convince and be convinced. I want to influence and be influenced.
Right.
I want to change you and help you change me.
Yep.
The dialectic is people engaged in that focused way, that open way, open to influence and being influenced, open to self-examination, open to being wrong and being right.
Yep. And not overly attached to their own constructs.
Not overly attached to their own constructs.
When we're engaging with others, and all parties are capable, as we were saying, of sort of toning down the opacity levels of their own constructs, right? Where we're not so attached to a particular way of thinking or a particular mental model or a particular self-concept. There's an experience of the group that I think every node every individual in the group is probably having some version of, where you look at each other and you recognize each other as aspects of your own mind, right? Like, my mind isn't just contained in my skull. It is an entire ecosystem that stretches out and reaches out and expresses itself through every individual that's participating with this occasion in this moment, right? So there's a distributed sort of feeling tone of mind, where we begin to realize that this voice of Corey is just sort of a seamless part of this larger mind that is enacting itself through each of us.
Yeah.
And what a vibe that is.